Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, I'm Oliver.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Welcome to Science in Easy English. Today's topic, is coffee actually good for you?
Yeah, and we are getting into a subject today that honestly dictates the daily rhythm of human civilization.
Right, because over 2.25 billion cups of coffee are consumed globally every single day.
It is a massive scale.
It really is. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a very high probability that you listening to this right now are either actively drinking a cup or, mentally calculating when you can justify your next one.
Oh,
Because it's such a foundational pillar
yeah.
of our daily routines, we really wanted to look past the marketing and the conflicting morning show headlines to get to the actual science.
Which is so important because it is arguably one of the most misunderstood beverages in human history. The scientific consensus on coffee has undergone a massive evolution over the last few decades.
We have a really substantial stack of source material guiding this deep dive today.
We do.
We're pulling from clinical trials published in PubMed, huge epidemiological cohort studies, reports from Harvard Health, and even current research on genetics and metabolism.
The mission here is to completely separate fact from fiction. We want to explore what this complex plant extract is actually doing to your brain, your body, and your long-term cellular health.
And as a quick teaser, how the specific way you brew it completely changes its health impact. But okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We need to start with the brain, specifically the mechanisms of wakefulness, and clear up some persistent myths right out of the gate. I remember growing up, there was this constant refrain that drinking coffee would stunt your growth.
Oh, yeah. The classic old wives' tale.
Right. I suspect millions of people were warned about this as teenagers.
It is a remarkably persistent piece of folklore, but we can definitively put it to rest right now.
Good.
There is zero scientifically valid evidence for this. Human height is dictated by genetics and childhood nutrition. Full stop.
So caffeine intake doesn't alter your skeletal development.
Not in that way, no. The sources suggest this myth likely mutated from an older concern regarding bone density and osteoporosis.
Oh, the idea that caffeine was somehow leaching calcium directly from our bones.
Exactly. But if you are worried about your bones, just ensure adequate calcium and vitamin D. It's the spinal compression fractures from advanced osteoporosis that cause older adults to lose height, not the coffee itself.
So the height myth is officially dead.
Dead and buried.
Perfect. But let's look at what coffee absolutely does do, which is alter our neurochemistry. It's always fascinating to me how it works. You take a few sips, and 20 minutes later, the cognitive fog just lifts. What is the actual mechanism at play in the brain?
To understand that, you first have to understand a neurotransmitter called adenosine.
Adenosine.
Right. As your brain neurons fire and burn energy throughout the day, adenosine is produced as a metabolic byproduct. It slowly accumulates in the brain and binds to specific receptors. You can think of adenosine as a biological metric for fatigue. The more it builds up and binds to those receptors, the more drowsy and sleep-pressured you feel.
So caffeine doesn't actually give us energy in the way calories do.
No, not at all. It acts as an adenosine receptor antagonist.
Because the caffeine molecule is structurally very similar to adenosine, right?
Yes. It travels to the brain and physically parks itself in those exact same receptors. Specifically, it targets the A2A receptors in a region of the brain called the nucleus accumbens shell.
The nucleus accumbens shell.
Exactly, which is a critical component of the brain's reward and motivation circuitry. When caffeine binds there, it competes with the adenosine. It blocks the sleepiness signal from getting through.
Wow.
And while it's blocking that fatigue signal, it simultaneously allows the activity of other crucial neurotransmitters to increase.
Like dopamine.
Exactly, like dopamine. That sustained dopamine activity in the reward center is what generates the elevated mood, the sharpened focus, and that profound feeling of alertness.
Wait, if the caffeine is just sitting there blocking the receptors, the brain is presumably still producing adenosine all day in the background, right?
It is.
Is that the cause of the infamous caffeine crash? Once the caffeine wears off and releases its hold on the receptors, does all that pent-up adenosine just flood the system?
That is precisely what happens. The fatigue doesn't disappear, it's merely delayed.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I want to throw in a fun fact from our sources about the roasting process,
Mm-hmm.
because it completely flips conventional wisdom.
Oh, the light versus dark roast debate.
Yes. People generally assume that a dark, oily, bitter French roast packs the biggest caffeine punch. But the data shows that is a massive myth.
It is highly counterintuitive.
Light roasts actually have a slightly higher caffeine concentration. The longer you expose the bean to high heat to get those dark, smoky flavors, the more the caffeine molecule actually breaks down.
So if you want maximum receptor blocking power, you actually want the lighter, fruitier roasts.
Exactly. But the acute effects on the brain are really just the beginning here.
They are. The most compelling data in our source stack deals with chronic disease prevention and longevity. We are essentially talking about a longevity potion.
In the epidemiological literature, we repeatedly see something called a J-shaped dose-response curve.
Right.
For you listening, a J-shaped curve in these massive studies which follow hundreds of thousands of people over decades, means that if you plot coffee consumption against the risk of all-cause mortality, the line actually dips down significantly at moderate consumption levels.
It forms the bottom of a J.
Exactly. And we should clearly define moderate based on these major studies.
The maximum protective benefit consistently lands in the range of 3 to 5 cups of coffee per day.
3 to 5 cups.
Yes. At that volume, individuals show a significantly lower risk of dying from all causes compared to people who don't drink coffee at all.
The specific breakdown of those health benefits is staggering. Moderate consumption lowers the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and stroke.
And it has profound neuroprotective qualities, too. It significantly reduces the risk of developing neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
We also have to highlight its impact on the liver. The literature shows it drastically reduces the risk of liver disease, including lowering incidence rates of liver cancer and cirrhosis.
It really is one of the most potent hepatoprotective agents in the human diet.
But caffeine alone can't possibly be doing all of that heavy lifting. Blocking sleep receptors doesn't cure liver cirrhosis.
No, it doesn't. And that's why we have to stop viewing coffee as just a caffeine delivery vehicle. It's a complex biological cocktail.
Right, it contains over 1,000 bioactive compounds.
Exactly. And for a significant portion of the population eating a standard Western diet, coffee is actually their primary daily source of dietary antioxidants and polyphenols.
The standout polyphenols in the research are chlorogenic acids.
Yes, chlorogenic acids are powerful systemic anti-inflammatory compounds. They actively improve glucose metabolism and help lower blood pressure.
And there's a fascinating recent finding regarding the gut microbiome. This is from a 2025 study published in the journal Nature Microbiology.
Oh, this study's incredible.
They discovered that regular coffee consumption is a massive driver for cultivating a healthy internal ecosystem. It specifically boosts a highly beneficial bacterium called Lawsonobacter acrolyticus.
Lawsonobacter saccharolyticus.
Yes. And having a robust population of this specific bacterium fortifies the gut lining and further drives down the systemic inflammation that contributes to chronic disease.
You're not just drinking a stimulant, you are ingesting an active, systemic health supplement that modulates your microbiome.
Which transitions us perfectly to the effects on our waistlines and workouts. Let's talk about the fat loss connection.
This is an area with some really nuanced recent data.
There is a very compelling 2023 DXA scan study that tracked body fat and coffee consumption.
And crucially, they didn't rely on flawed metrics like BMI. They utilized DXA scans so they could see the direct impact on specific fat deposits.
Right. What the researchers found was that increasing caffeinated coffee intake from a low baseline, say 0 to infrequent, up to a moderate level of 1 to 7 cups a week, was associated with significant reductions in total body fat.
And more importantly, it specifically reduced trunk fat and visceral adipose tissue, or VAT.
VAT is the deeply concerning fat that wraps around your internal organs. It's the primary driver of metabolic syndrome.
Yes. Reducing VAT is a massive victory for metabolic health. But we have to emphasize the nuance in this study.
Right, because more isn't always better.
Exactly. Moving to high consumption, which this specific study defined as more than a cup a day in their parameters, did not yield those same favorable fat changes.
And decaf didn't show this effect at all.
Decaf did not produce the fat loss effect.
So the caffeine and the polyphenols have to work in tandem. Caffeine increases thermogenesis, which is heat production, and directly stimulates fat oxidation during exercise.
It signals the body to mobilize and burn stored free fatty acids for fuel.
Which is why caffeine is the foundational ingredient in almost every sports performance supplement.
It undeniably enhances physical performance.
While we're on physical performance, we need to address the hydration myth. For decades, people believed coffee actively dehydrates you.
The old advice to drink a glass of water for every cup of coffee just to break even.
Exactly. But the data shows that is entirely false.
While caffeine is a mild diuretic, the actual volume of fluid contained in a standard cup of coffee completely overrides and offsets that minor diuretic action.
So your morning coffee absolutely counts toward your total daily hydration goals.
It does. But we do need to issue a stark warning here. All these metabolic and cardiovascular benefits can be easily neutralized.
The heavy sugar and cream caveat.
Yes. If you take that complex cocktail of chlorogenic acids and you flood it with heavy syrups and refined sugar, you severely attenuate the health benefits.
The massive influx of sugar spikes your insulin, driving fat storage and effectively canceling out the fat oxidizing benefits of the caffeine. Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it's not just about the additives you pour into the cup. Our sources reveal that the specific way you brew the coffee fundamentally alters its medical profile.
The brewing revelation. This flies completely under the radar for most consumers.
We've praised the beneficial compounds, but coffee beans also naturally contain two oily compounds known as diterpenes.
Cafestol and Cowol.
Right, and according to the clinical literature, cafestol and Cowil are incredibly potent at raising LDL cholesterol levels in the blood.
They disrupt the liver's ability to clear out LDL, which is the bad cholesterol.
So this raises an important question. If coffee is supposed to be highly protective of the heart, how do we reconcile the presence of these cholesterol-raising diterpenes?
The answer lies entirely in the filter.
The type of bean doesn't matter. The roast doesn't matter. The filter matters.
Paper filters act as highly effective mechanical health guardians. The microscopic fibers in the paper trap the oily cafestol and Cowol compounds before they hit your cup.
So with a paper filter, like in a standard drip machine or a pour-over, you get all the neuroprotective benefits, all the chlorogenic acids, but the diterpenes get trapped.
But if you use unfiltered methods, you are consuming high doses of those oils.
This means the French press.
The French press, yeah.
Metal-filtered percolators, mocha pots, and even espresso.
Even espresso. Because it forces hot water through a metal basket, those diterpenes slip right through into your shot.
If you are actively managing your cholesterol levels, switching exclusively to paper-filtered coffee is a massive biological difference.
Absolutely.
Think about your setup at work, if you're listening to this right now. If your break room machine uses a permanent metal mesh filter, it might be time to bring a simple paper-filtered pour-over cone to keep at your desk.
That is highly practical advice. And beyond the brewing method, the timing of your consumption also plays a pivotal role.
Right, because our bodies operate on circadian rhythms. There's a study from January 2025 in the European Heart Journal that analyzed the timing of coffee intake.
And they found that drinking your coffee before noon is linked to the greatest degree of cardiovascular protection.
Before noon.
Yes. The researchers noted that if consumption is spread out all day, those cardiovascular benefits essentially disappear.
Because late-day caffeine disrupts the architecture of our deep sleep.
That's the leading hypothesis. Deep sleep is when your cardiovascular system undergoes repair. If circulating caffeine prevents that restorative sleep, you negate the benefits.
We also need to be objective and acknowledge that coffee isn't universally tolerated.
No, not at all. For a subset of the population, it presents genuine adverse side effects.
It can aggravate acid reflux and GERD. It can be a trigger for migraines.
And for pregnant listeners, the standard medical advice from organizations like ACOG is to strictly cap caffeine at 200 milligrams a day.
There's also the issue of anxiety and jitters. You can have two people drink the exact same volume of coffee. One feels focused, the other experiences a racing heart and intense anxiety.
Why does it vary so wildly?
That's where the science of genetics comes in.
It all
Comes down to a specific gene called CYP1A2.
The CYP1A2 gene. This gene dictates whether you are a fast or slow metabolizer of caffeine.
Due to natural genetic variation in our DNA.
Exactly. If you have the fast variant, your liver processes the caffeine rapidly, you get the cognitive boost, and then it clears out.
These are the people who can down an espresso after dinner and sleep like a baby.
Right. But for slow metabolizers, the liver enzyme is inefficient. The caffeine lingers in the bloodstream for hours.
The lunchtime latte keeps them awake until 3 a.m.
And it actually shifts the risk profile. If a slow metabolizer drinks 4 cups a day, that prolonged presence of caffeine can keep their blood pressure elevated for too long.
It varies based on your personal DNA.
It does.
So what does this all mean? We have navigated adenosine, the J-shaped mortality curve, body fat oxidation, the cholesterol trap of the French press, and liver genetics.
The ultimate takeaway is profoundly encouraging. For the vast majority of people, assuming you don't have a specific medical contraindication or severe genetic sensitivity, consuming 3 to 5 cups of paper-filtered black or lightly modified coffee a day is highly advantageous.
It's an active investment in your long-term metabolic, cognitive, and cardiovascular health.
It is not just a stimulant.
It's remarkably rare to find a compound so deeply ingrained in our culture that is simultaneously so structurally beneficial to our cellular health. Tomorrow morning, when you brew that paper-filtered cup, we want you to view it through a new lens.
Appreciate it as a rich cocktail of neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory polyphenols.
Exactly. Now, I want to leave you with one final provocative insight from the clinical literature that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, the surgery data.
Yes. Did you know that doctors are increasingly utilizing coffee as a targeted medical intervention in postoperative care?
It's fascinating.
Recent clinical trials demonstrate that administering coffee to patients significantly enhances and speeds up bowel recovery following major abdominal surgery.
It wakes up the digestive tract faster and more safely than many traditional pharmacological methods.
Let that percolate in your mind. This humble bean, which fueled the Industrial Revolution, is essentially a highly complex natural pharmaceutical that we just happen to drink for fun.
It really is an incredible plant.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the science of coffee. We will catch you next time.